In any society where there is some freedom of opportunity, ambitious young men are an element of extreme importance. Their numbers are formidable and their intelligence and aggressiveness much more so. In short, they want an opening and are bound to get it. As the members of this class are mainly impecunious, it might be supposed that they would be a notable offset to the power of wealth. And in a sense they are. It is their interest to keep open the opportunity to rise, and they are accordingly inimical to caste and everything which tends toward it. But it by no means follows that they are opposed to the ascendancy of an upper class based on wealth and position. This becomes evident when one remembers that their aim is not to raise the lower class, but to get out of it. The rising young man does not identify himself with the lowly stratum of society in which he is born, but, dissatisfied with his antecedents, he strikes out for wealth, power, or fame. In doing so, he fixes his eyes on those who have these things, and from whose example he may learn how to gain them, thus tending to accept the ideals and standards of the actual upper class. He gives a great deal of attention to the points of view of a railroad president, B, a senator, and even of C, head of a labor organization. But to a mere farmer or laborer, whose hand is on no levers, he is indifferent. The students of our universities are subject to a conflict between the healthy idealism of youth, which prevails with the more generous, and the influences just indicated, which become stronger as education draws closer to practical affairs. On the whole, possessed of one great privilege and eager to gain others, they are not so close in spirit to the unprivileged classes as might be imagined. Thus, the force of ambitious youth goes largely to support the ascendancy of the money-getting class. Directly, in that it accepts the ideals of this class and looks forward to sharing its power. Indirectly, in that it is withdrawn from the resources of the humbler class. How long will the rising lawyer retain his college enthusiasm for social reform if the powers that be welcome him and pay him salaries? We have then the fact, rather paradoxical at first sight, that the dominant class in a competitive society, although unstable as to its individual membership, may well be more secure as a whole than the corresponding class under any other system, precisely because it continually draws into itself most of the natural ability from the other classes. Throughout English history, we are told, the salvation of the aristocracy has been its comparative openness. The fact that ability could percolate into it instead of rising up behind it like water behind a dam, as was the case in pre-revolutionary France. And the same principle is working even more effectually in our own economic order. A great weakness of the trades union movement, as of all attempts at self-assertion on the part of the less privileged classes, is that it is constantly losing able leaders. As soon as a man shows that marked capacity which would fit him to do something for his fellows, it is 10 to 1 that he accepts a remunerative position, and so passes into the upper class. It is increasingly the practice, perhaps in some degree the deliberate policy, of organized wealth to win over in this way the more promising leaders from the side of labor. And this is one respect in which a greater class consciousness and loyalty on the part of the latter would add to its strength. Thus, it is possible to have freedom to rise and yet have at the same time a miserable and perhaps degraded lower class. Degraded because the social system is administered with little regard to its just needs. This is more the case with our own industrial system, and with modern society in general, than our self-satisfaction commonly perceives. Our one-sided ideal of freedom, excellent so far as it goes, has somewhat blinded us to the encroachments of slavery on an unguarded flank. I mean such things as bad housing, insecurity, excessive and deadening work, child labor, and the lack of any education suited to the industrial masses. The last likely to be remedied now that it is seen to threaten industrial prosperity. It is hard to say how much of the timidity noticeable in the discussion of questions of this sort by the comfortable classes is due to a vague dread of anarchy and spoliation by an organized and self-conscious lower class. But probably a good deal. If power under democracy goes with numbers and the many are poor, it would seem at first glance that they would despoil the few. To conservative thinkers 100 or even 50 years ago, this seemed almost an axiom. But a less superficial philosophy has combined with experience to show that anarchy, in Mr. Bryce's words, is of all dangers or bugbears the one which the modern world has least cause to fear. The most apparent reason for this is the one already discussed, namely that power does not go with mere numbers, under a democracy more than under any other form of government. A democratic aristocracy, that is one whose members maintain their position in an open struggle, being without doubt the strongest that can exist. We shall never have a revolution until we have caste, which, as has been argued, is but a remote possibility. And as an ally of established power, there is the inertia of social structure, something so massive and profound that the loudest agitation is no more than a breeze ruffling the surface of deep waters. Dominated by the habits which it has generated, all uphold the existing order without knowing it. There may, of course, be sudden changes due to the fall of what has long been rotten, but there is little cause to suppose that the timbers of our system are in this condition. They are rough and unlovely, but far from weak. Another conservative condition is that economic solidarity which makes the welfare of all classes hang together, so that any general disturbance causes suffering to all, and more to the weak than to the strong. A sudden change, however reasonable its direction, must in this way discredit its authors and bring about reaction. The hand-working classes may get much less of the economic product than they ought to, but they are not so badly off that they cannot be worse, and, unless they lose their heads, will always unite with other classes to preserve that state of order, which is the guarantee of what they have. Anarchy would benefit no one, unless criminals, and anything resembling a general strike is a childish expedient, not likely to be countenanced by the more sober and hard-headed leaders of the labor movement. All solid betterment of the workers must be based on and get its nourishment from the existing system of production, which must only gradually be changed, however defective it may be. The success of strikes, and of all similar tactics, depends in the nature of things on their being partial, and drawing support from the undisturbed remainder of the process. It is the same principle of mingling stability with improvement which governs progress everywhere. And finally, effective organization on the part of the less privileged classes goes along with intelligence, with training in orderly methods of self-assertion, and with education in the necessity of patience and compromise. The more real power they get, the more conservatively, as a rule, they use it. Where free speech exists, there will always be a noisy party advocating precipitate change, and a timid party who are afraid of them. But the more the people are trained in real democracy, the less will be the influence of this element. Whatever divisions there may be in society, it is quite enough an organic whole to unite in casting out tendencies that are clearly anarchic. And it is also evident that such tendencies are to be looked for at least as much among the rich as among the poor. If there is at one extreme anarchists who would like to despoil other people, at the other there are monopolists and financiers who actually do so. It is a common opinion that the sway of riches over the human mind is greater in this time than previously, and greater in America than elsewhere. How far is this really the case? To understand this matter, it must not be forgotten that the ardor of the chase, as in a fox hunt, may have little to do with the value of the quarry. The former certainly was never so great in the pursuit of wealth as here and now, chiefly because the commercial trend of the times, due to a variety of causes, supplies unequaled opportunities and incitements to engage in the money game. In this, therefore, the competitive zeal of an energetic people finds its main expression. But to say that wealth stands for more in the inner thought of men, that to have or not to have it makes a greater intrinsic difference, is another and a questionable proposition, and likely the opposite of the truth. Such spiritual value as personal wealth has comes from its power over the means of spiritual development. It is therefore diminished by everything which tends to make those means common property, and the new order has this tendency. When money was the only way to education, to choice of occupation, to books, leisure and variety of intercourse, it was essential to the intellectual life. There was no belonging to the cultured class without it. But with free schools and libraries, the diffusion of magazines and newspapers, cheap travel, less stupefying labor and shorter hours, culture opportunity is more and more extended, and the best goods of life are opened, if not to all, yet to an ever-growing proportion. Men of the humblest occupations can and do become gentlemen and scholars. Indeed, people are coming more and more to think that exclusive advantages are uncongenial to real culture, since the deepest insight into humanity can belong only to those who share and reflect upon the common life. The effect is that wealth is shorn of much of that prestige of knowledge, breeding, and opportunity which always meant more than its material power. The intellectual and spiritual center of gravity, like the political, sinks down into the masses of the people. Though our rich are rich beyond the dreams of avarice, they mean less to the inner life of the time, exercise less spiritual authority perhaps than the corresponding class in any older society. They are the objects of popular curiosity, resentment, admiration, or envy, rather than the moral deference given to a real aristocracy. They are not taken too seriously. Indeed, there could be no better proof that the rich are no overwhelming power with us than the amount of good-natured ridicule expended upon them. Were they really a dominant order? The ridicule, if ventured at all, would not be good-natured. Their ascendancy is great when compared with a theory of equality, and in this sense the remarks in the last chapter should be understood, but small compared with that of the ruling classes of the old world. Over a class of frenzied gold-seekers, rich or poor, chiefly in the towns, the money idea is no doubt ascendant. But if you approach the ordinary farmer, mechanic, or sober tradesman, you are likely to find that he sets no high rate on wealth beyond what is necessary for the frugal support of a family, and that he neither admires nor envies the rich, but looks at the millionaire and thinks, after all, it isn't life. What does he get out of it more than the rest of us? The typical American is an idealist, and the people he looks up to are those who stand in some way for the ideal life, or whom he supposes to do so, most commonly statesmen, but often writers, scientists, or teachers. Education and culture, as Mr. Bryce and others have noticed, is cherished by plain people all over the land, often to a degree that puts to shame its professed representatives. We find, then, that agitators who strive to incite the people against the rich encounter with disgust an idealism which refuses to believe that their advantages are extravagantly great. And one of the main grievances of such men is what they look upon as the folly or lack of spirit of the poor in this regard. Never before, probably, was there so large a class of people who, having riches, feel that they are a doubtful blessing, especially in relation to the nurture of children. Many a successful man is at his wit's end to give his children those advantages of enforced industry, frugality, and self-control, which he himself enjoyed. One of the richest men of the day holds that accumulations are generally bad for the children, as well as for society, and favors almost unlimited graduated taxation of inheritances. According to the philosophy which he supports by practice as well as theory, the man who finds himself rich is to live modestly and use his surplus as a trust fund for the benefit of the public. What would a man wish for his own son, if he could choose? First, no doubt, some high and engrossing purpose, which should fill his life with a sense of worthy striving and aspiration. After this, he would wish for health, friends, peace of mind, the enjoyment of books, a happy family life, and material comfort. But the last beyond that degree which even unskilled labor should bring, he would regard as of secondary importance. Not a straightened house and table, but a straightened soul is the real evil, and the two are more separable now than formerly. The more a real democracy prevails, the less is the spiritual ascendancy of riches. There is, for instance, no such settled and institutional deference to wealth in the United States as there seems to be in England. The reason being, in part, that where there are inherited classes, there are also class standards of living, costly in the upper class, to which those who would live in good company are under pressure to conform. In England, there is actually a ruling order, however ill-defined, which is generally looked up to, and membership in which is apparently the ambition of a large majority of all aspiring men who do not belong to it by birth. Its habits and standards are such that only the comparatively rich can be at home in it. There is nothing corresponding to this with us. We have richer men, and the pursuit of riches is an even livelier game. But there is no such ascendancy in wealth, no such feeling that one must be rich to be respectable. With us, if people have money, they enjoy it. If not, they manage with what they have, neither regarding themselves nor regarded by others as essentially inferior. It is also a general feeling here that wealth should not be a controlling factor in marriage, and it is not common for American parents to object seriously to a proposed son-in-law, much less a daughter-in-law, on the mere ground of lack of means apart from his capacity to earn a living. The matter-of-fact mercenariness in this regard, which, as we are led to believe by the novelists, prevails in the upper circles of England, is as yet somewhat shocking to the American mind. Hereditary titles, sometimes imagined to be a counterpoise to the ascendancy of wealth, are really, in our time at least, a support and sanction to it, giving it an official standing and permanence it cannot have in democracy. We understand that in England, wealth, with tact, patience, and maybe political services, will procure a title which, unlike anything one can get for money in America, is indestructible by vice and folly, and can be used over and over to buy wealth in marriage. Nothing works better in America than the promptness with which the degenerate scions of honored parents drop out of sight. Rank is not an offset, but a reward and bribe to wealth. Perhaps the only merit that can be claimed for it in this connection being that the desire and deference for it imposes a certain discipline on the arrogance of newly acquired riches. The English idea that those in high offices should have a magnificent style of living, becoming to their station, is also one that goes with caste feeling. It makes it hardly decent for the poor to hold such offices, and is almost absent here, where if riches are important to political success, the condition is one of which the people do not approve and would gladly dispense with. The whole conception which imputes merit to wealth and seeks at least the appearance of the latter in modes of dress, attendance, and the like, is probably stronger everywhere in Europe than in the United States. It is not the purpose of this book to add anything to the merely controversial literature of the time, and in treating the present topic, it intends no more than to state a few simple and perhaps obvious principles designed to connect it with the general line of thought. It is quite apparent that an organized and intelligent class consciousness in the hand-working people is one of the primary needs of a democratic society. Insofar as this part of the people is lacking in a knowledge of its situation and in the practice of orderly self-assertion, a real freedom will also be lacking, and there will be some kind of subjection in its place. Freedom being impossible without group organization. That industrial classes exist, in the sense already explained, cannot well be denied, and existing they ought to be conscious and self-directing. The most obvious need of class consciousness is for self-assertion against the pressure of other classes, and this is both most necessary and most difficult with those who lack wealth and the command over organized forces which it implies. In a free society, especially those who are weak in money must be strong in union, and must also exert themselves to make good any deficiency in leadership that comes from ability deserting to more favored classes. That the dominant power of wealth has an oppressive action, for the most part involuntary, upon the people below can hardly be denied. The industrial progress of the time is accompanied by sufferings that are involved with the progress. These sufferings, at least in their more tangible forms, fall almost wholly upon the poorer classes, while the richer get a larger share of the increased product which the progress brings. By sufferings is meant not only the physical hardship and liability to disease, early decay, and mutilation or death by accident, which fall to the handworker, but also the debasement of children by premature and stunting labor, the comparative lack of intellectual and social opportunities, the ugly and discouraging surroundings, and the insecurity of employment to which he and his are subject. There is no purpose to inflict these things, but they are inflicted, and the only remedy is a public consciousness, especially in the classes who suffer from them, of their causes and the means by which they can be done away with. The principal expressions of class consciousness in the handworking classes in this day are labor unions and that wider, vaguer, more philosophical or religious movement, too various for definition, which is known as socialism. Regarding the latter, it may be said only that it includes much of what is most vital in the contemporary working of the democratic spirit. The large problems with which its doctrines deal are better discussed in a more general way. Labor unions are a simpler matter. They have arisen out of the urgent need of self-defense, not so much against deliberate aggression as against brutal confusion and neglect. The industrial population has been tossed about on the swirl of economic change like so much sawdust on a river, sometimes prosperous, sometimes miserable, never secure, and living largely under degrading, inhuman conditions. Against this state of things, the higher class of artisans, as measured by skill, wages, and general intelligence, have made a partly successful struggle through cooperation and associations, which, however, include much less than half of those who might be expected to take advantage of them. That they are an effective means of class self-assertion is evident from the antagonism they have aroused. Besides their primary function of group bargaining, which has come to be generally recognized as essential, unions are performing a variety of services hardly less important to their members, and serviceable to society at large. In the way of influencing legislation, they have probably done more than all other agencies together to combat child labor, excessive hours, and other inhuman and degrading kinds of work. Also to provide for safeguards against accident, for proper sanitation of factories and the like. In this field, their work is as much defensive as aggressive, since employing interests on the other side are constantly influencing legislation and administration to their own advantage. Their function as spheres of fellowship and self-development is equally vital and less understood. To have a we feeling, to live shoulder to shoulder with one's fellows, is the only human life. All need it to keep from selfishness, sensuality, and despair, and the handworker needs it even more than the rest. Usually without pecuniary resource and insecure of his job and his home, he is, in isolation, miserably weak, and in a way to be cowed and unmanned by misfortune or mere apprehension. Drifting about in a confused society, unimportant apparently to the rest of the world, it is no wonder if he feels, "I am no link of thy great chain," and loses faith in himself, in life and in God. The union makes him feel that he is part of a whole, one of a fellowship, that there are those who will stand by him in trouble, that he counts for something in the great life. He gets from it that thrill of broader sentiment, the same in kind that men get in fighting for their country. His self is enlarged and enriched, and his imagination fed with objects comparatively immense and eternal. Moreover, the life of labor unions and other class associations, through the training which it gives in democratic organization and discipline, is perhaps the chief guarantee of the healthy political development of the hand-working class, especially those imported from non-democratic civilizations, and the surest barrier against recklessness and disorder. That their members get this training is evident to anyone who studies their working, and it is not apparent that they would get it in any other way. Men learn most in acting for purposes which they understand and are interested in, and this is more certain to be the case with economic aims than with any other. Thus, if unions should never raise wages or shorten hours, they would yet be invaluable to the manhood of their members. At worst, they ensure the joy of an open fight and of companionship in defeat. Self-assertion through voluntary organization is of the essence of democracy, and if any part of the people proves incapable of it, it is a bad sign for the country. On this ground alone, it would seem that patriots should desire to see organization of this sort extend throughout the industrial population. The danger of these associations is that which besets human nature everywhere, the selfish use of power. It is feared with reason that if they have too much their own way, they will monopolize opportunity by restricting apprenticeship and limiting the number of their members, that they will seek their ends through intimidation and violence, that they will be made the instruments of corrupt leaders. These and similar wrongs have from time to time been brought home to them, and, unless their members are superior to the common run of men, they are such as must be expected. But it would be a mistake to regard these or any other kinds of injustice as a part of the essential policy of unions. They are feeling their way in a human, fallible manner, and their eventual policy will be determined by what, in the way of class advancement, they find by experience to be practicable. Insofar as they attempt things that are unjust, there is reason to expect them, in the long run, to fail, through the resistance of others and through the awakening of their own consciences. It is the part of other people to check their excesses and cherish their benefits. In general, no sort of persons mean better than hand-laboring men. They are simple, honest people, as a rule, with that bent toward integrity which is fostered by working in wood and iron, and often lost in the subtleties of business. Moreover, their experience is such as to develop a sense of the brotherhood of man and a desire to realize it in institutions. Not having enjoyed the artificial support of accumulated property, they have the more reason to know the dependence of each on his fellows, nor have they any great hopes of personal aggrandizement to isolate them and pamper their self-consciousness. To these may be added that offenses from this quarter are likely to be more shocking and less dangerous than those of a more sophisticated sort of people. Occasional outbreaks of violence alarm and call for prompt enforcement of law, but are not a serious menace to society because general sentiment and all established interests are against them. While the subtle, respectable, systematic corruption by the rich and powerful threatens the very being of democracy. The most deplorable fact about labor unions is that they embrace so small a proportion of those that need their benefits. How far into the shifting masses of unskilled labor effective organization can extend, only time will show. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, I suggest you to subscribe to the channel so that you will be notified when new videos are out. Also, you might want to check our link in the description, where you'll find many other fundamental advertising and psychology books in different languages. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.